Now I'm going to show you some advanced track version editing, and you'll notice that when you have a track selected, you can come under the Project menu and there's a new track versions heading there, and it contains some of the functions we've already talked about, including making new versions, duplicating, renaming, or deleting versions, but you also have keyboard shortcuts for selecting from your computer keyboard previous versions and next versions. That's simply by holding down the Shift command and Control or Command and H for the next version, and the same command except G for the previous version. There's also these two features, which I'll talk about in a moment, because they can make it really easy to make even bigger conglomerations of different takes between your track versions. But let's talk about a very simple way to do just that. Let's say that each of those track versions has elements on it that we want to include in our final mix. Well, what we can do is close the track lanes, and I'm going to add a new audio track to my project. And I'll just go ahead and make that mono, since that's mono information. And I'll call this bass complete. And now what I could do is click and drag individual components from both track versions onto our new track. So I could choose the clean version first, and let's say I want the project to start with that take. So I'm going to just click and drag that down onto the new track. But then I'd want to include the dirty version at the end of that section. So then I will call up the dirty version, and now I can click and drag components of that onto my final track. So now let's mute the original track and listen to the result. So that's how you can make one complete track out of many different takes and track versions contained on another track. But there's actually another cooler way to do it. So I'm going to hit undo a few times to get me back to where I was before without that additional track. And then I'm going to unmute the original bass track itself. And then I'm going to show you some other ways that you can edit this information still on just one track. So what I can do now is come to the Project menu, select Track Versions, and I can create lanes from each version. Watch what happens. When I do that and I open up the comping lanes, now that command has made a brand new track version, which is a conglomeration of all of the takes from the previous two track versions. So it's taken all of the takes from this track version and this track version and made a brand new one from it. And from that, I could come to my comping tool, and I could say, I still want to hear that clean version first. So here's the clean one, and then things get dirty right about here and here. So that gives you a brand new track version with all of your takes from all of the track versions. But I'm going to undo a few times. I'm going to show you another cool feature. With the same track selected, I can come under the Project menu and go to Track Versions, and I can create versions from lanes. And that will take every single take that was in both of those track versions and make individual track versions out of each one. You'll notice now we can come over and choose the front pickup, the both pickups, or those other two takes have now been added as new track versions for even more editing that you can do between takes and track versions. And lastly, I want to show you how to use version IDs. You'll notice that all of those tracks have different ID numbers, but sometimes you want different track versions to align with other tracks that have the same ID. So to do that, what I'm going to do is clean up my tracks here a little bit. I'm going to close the comping lanes, and then I'm going to take the other track that has track versions on it, which is this Taurus pedal track, and I'm just going to put it closer to the bass track so that you can see how this works. Now, each of these tracks have different track versions on them. If we look at the bass track, you can see that we have those initial two track versions plus the other two that we made just a moment ago. Plus, on the Taurus pedals track, there are also two different versions, but each of those versions has a different ID number. So what if we wanted the first version of the Taurus pedals to correspond with the first track version of the bass track? You can see that that first track version has an ID number of 1 for the bass, and on the Taurus pedals, that first track version has an ID of 3. So if we wanted to be able to choose those two track versions simultaneously, what we can do is select both of those tracks. So I'm going to hold down the Control or Command button and click on both of those tracks so that they're both selected. And then under the project window, I'm going to go to track versions and choose Assign Common Version ID, and watch what happens. Now what it's done is it's taken that first track version on the bass track and made it ID number 10. And on the Taurus pedal track, it's also made that first version 10. So that way, when I have those two tracks selected and I'm choosing that first track ID, which is 10, it's going to switch the other selected tracks to the same track ID. Let me give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. I'm going to single click this one track and I'm going to call up a different ID number, which is 2. Now that is not corresponding to that ID of 10. But now what I can do is if I wanted all of those tracks selected so that I can choose the same ID, I can come under one of the tracks and choose Select Tracks with the same version ID, and you'll notice that it also selected the Taurus pedal track. Now when I call up that ID number 10, it's going to automatically switch any of those other selected and corresponding ID tracks with the same ID number, and that's really useful when you want to export different versions of your projects when your tracks have different track versions. So by assigning those different track IDs, it makes it very simple to choose the track versions that go together. So those are the advanced track version editing features, and in the next section, I'm going to talk to you about track visibility.